Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway. Gayatri will be back in her chair next week. Now, I always called him the best Chancellor of the Exchequer that Britain never had. The Liberal Democrat wipeout at the general election was no fault of his. So far as one can tell through the mists of collective cabinet responsibility, Dr. Sir Vince Cable remained true to his principles throughout the coalition government. Principles of social democracy in short supply in a cabinet of exceedingly rich men led by David Cameron and Gideon Osborne. Now the coalition and his seat in Parliament are gone. Let's see if any of the mist has cleared. And welcome Dr. Vince Cable to the Sputnik. Vince, thanks for coming on board. We'll talk about your new book in just a minute. But first, I'd like to ask you how you've seen the whole Jeremy Corbyn phenomenon. You and I sat with him in Parliament for many of a year. Neither of us thought, he didn't think that he'd ever end up as the leader of Her Majesty's opposition. It's kind of burst on the political scene as a kind of rare phenomenon. I say not since Attlee defeated Churchill has there been an upset like it. How does it seem to you?
Well, I think everybody's been taken aback, I think including him. I think this sort of upsurge of energy and radicalism, I think there's a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, the worry I have is that he will be trounced by the Tories, and that the Tories will now feel much stronger because they've got an opponent they think they can beat, and will move the centre of gravity of British politics to the right. And they will pose as a centre party, which of course is ludicrous, but they say we've got Farage over here and we've got Corbyn over there and we're in the middle. And I think if I was a gambling man, I would say right now they have a good chance of staying in power for a long time. It's a pity, but I think that's the consequence.
Although David Cameron, plush, polished, pumped up, born to rule, flashman, he'll not be Jeremy Corbyn's opponent. It'll be George Osborne, almost certainly. Now, you've been up close and personal with him more than I, but it seems to me he's an easier opponent for Corbyn than Cameron would have been.
Well, he's a very smart guy. I mean, he's a very strategic, very thoughtful. He does a lot of the planning for the Tories behind the scene. And his chance of following through the legacy depends on the economy. You know, if it tanks in 2 or 3 years' time, I think it could. I think the risks are there, is what I wrote about in this book. Then he will not be such a powerful proposition as he appears today. So the timing of his going into the top job and then succeeding in it depend very much on the economic legacy.
I think Cameron's pretty determined that he'll be his successor, though.
Well, he's more or less announced it.
More or less, and he feels, I think, quite sore about the only real alternative, Boris Johnson.
You know, people have different views about Boris Johnson. I don't take him quite as seriously. I mean, you know, he's a clever guy, actually, underneath the buffoonery. But I think, unfortunately, he's become the victim of his own image, and he's not taken seriously anymore. I think Theresa May is potentially a powerful opponent if things go badly wrong. She's, as I discovered in my arguments with her over immigration when we were in the government, she's quite a tough cookie.
Now, the Corbyn victory was met with a tidal wave of media ferocity. One of the most bizarre was the Republican Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper making a gigantic brouhaha over the singing of God Save the Queen. You were famously sceptical of Murdoch's power on the media scene and were determined to try and stop it becoming even more powerful, hegemonic. How do you see the British media scene now, and particularly Rupert Murdoch's place within it?
Well, the Sun newspaper, as you probably remember from the last general election, they managed to be in favour of Scottish independence in Scotland and against it in England. So they have this capacity to tailor themselves to their audience. But they're powerful players, obviously. I never met the Murdochs personally. It's not a personal thing. But I was concerned, as you obviously are, about media concentration. It's still a big issue. But I think the particular area where I got into controversy was trying to stop the takeover of B-Sky B, and indeed, by referring it to the competition authorities, that's what's happened. But I think in the wider picture, I do worry that this whole issue about concentration of power in private, usually right-leaning media hands is growing.